Hey, what's going on, everybody? So today we're going to be looking at a second part looking at out-of-bounds stuff in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, the first part video is really great. If you haven't seen it, I recommend that you check it out after this. And it was thanks to Franz Boema, who made this camera, to look at it then, and we're able to look at it right now. And rather than waste any more time, let's just jump right into it and see what else I was able to find for Final Fantasy VII Remake. So the first thing I want to talk about is something that I teased at the end of the last episode, and that was Jessie's apartment or living situation. It's something that you can just barely see in a cutscene where she opens the door for you. But there's a lot of stuff inside, and so although there isn't 4 walls, surprisingly, I do want to go over all the things I was able to see while I was in there. So there's an interesting looking foot rug as well as some sandals right inside the door. And now that we've seen what happens to Jessie once she closes the door for the cutscene, we can look at some of the other things too, like a cardboard box full of books and what it looks like a script, kind of falls in line with the character. Since she was originally an actress at the Gold Saucer, there also appears to be some sort of brush, a dustpan, some chemicals, a couple of posters, an old wood grain tube TV with a TV stand that is similar to one that I own myself. It also has a vent over on top of the wall, don't want to forget to mention that. There's also a couch and a dresser with nondescript items on top. And those wondering about a second floor, well, here you can take a quick look and you'll see that there is nothing modeled, which of course is predictable, but you have to check. We'll get back to looking at environments again in a little bit. For now, I just want to look inside of more character models and show you all the cool stuff that I was able to find. Like this enemy that you've been looking at this whole time. Although his chest can be exposed at some point during battle in-game, the weak point for this character is modeled at all times. And then we got the Hell House. Now, taking the camera inside of it will show you that it has a full anatomy. Now, you can get small glimpses of this through the windows in which the limbs burst out of, but there's so much chaos going on and everything else that you really can't get a strong look inside of the Hell House. But it's complete with a chassis, joints, and all the limbs that you can see outside the house are attached to something that's inside the house. It's really freaking crazy. And to top this off, take a look at underneath the house. There's a whole texture with bump mapping that resembles the bottom of a car. And here you go, this is my favorite discovery for this episode. Inside the Shinra building, there are models for all the different types of soldiers, and I thought to myself, oh, surely, if I take the camera inside of one of these glass cases, we're gonna see the eyes that we saw in the first episode. And I was completely wrong, horrifyingly wrong. The eyes for this model in particular has the face texture of the model itself, which is horrifying, absolutely horrifying. And keep in mind, this is the only model that does this. The rest of them just share a black texture where the eyes should be. Also in the last video, we looked at the inside of the president of Shinra and discovered that there was a cigar that's completely attached to the model, which in turn means that the cigar will always be somewhere on his model, like on the inside of him. And at the time, I didn't realize that there was more tools from Franz than what I already had at the time, and so I wanted to show you again in a completely different scene, the cigar that I mentioned in the previous episode. Here it is, all in one shot, and without any defocusing. And then there's the Whispers of Fate. Now, there's a couple of different versions of this model, but this is a version of the model that is the most detailed. It's also the model that's used in the enemy intel menu. And what's interesting to see is that these are all hooded-like characters, which you really can't see what's on the inside of the hood because the model is darkened and shadowed. But taking the camera inside of the model will show you at least an inverted image of what the back of the inside of a Whisper's hood would look like. And what's the most surprising of all is that, ironically, when there's no lighting effects added to it, this is the brightest part of the model itself, sporting a lot more white than how the rest of the body looks. And now we just need to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Skillshare. Now, Skillshare is an online learning community that has classes for the creatives. Whether you're a college graduate or still in high school, Skillshare offers you the opportunity to expand your skill set, whether that be in animation, creative writing, film and video, fine art, graphic design, and more. Heck, I even personally wasn't interested in the creativity classes that they had to offer. Instead, I saw that they had productivity and lifestyle changes that you can make for yourself, and I got into that. One of the most recent ones that I checked out was Create a Perfect Morning Routine with Jeff Finley, which really helped to min-max my morning routine. Honestly, I never thought to do meditation before this class, and I gotta admit, I never thought that I would ever work into a morning routine, yet here we are. And the first 1,000 people to use my link using code Shesez can get a 1-month trial of Skillshare for free. Go ahead and click the link in the description, and thanks again Skillshare for sponsoring the show. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at interesting things in the environments. And the first thing we can start off by talking about is the menu screen before you start the game. Now, because there's DLC, there's 2 weapons that are on the screen instead of just the one Buster Sword. The Buster Sword is fully modeled, which may or may not have been something that you were expecting. But behind all of that is a mysterious sky blue orb, and its purpose is not immediately apparent. It rests behind the Buster Sword and underneath the geometry that makes up the ground. And although it can't be said with certainty, it's likely that this orb has some sort of coating attached to it. Moving on though, once you get outside into Midgar, after the bomb goes off, there's a piece of unused geometry that the player doesn't get a chance to see. Behind these opaque doors, even though they are glass, you take the camera inside there very, very slightly, you can see that there are shutters that the developers decided to model on top of. Now it's possible that the shutters were meant to be seen behind the glass at one point, or it's also possible that they originally were going for shutters and decided it didn't look as interesting as having doors, and so they modeled the doors closer to the launch date. And then we got Arif's house. Wanted to look around the room for a little bit because I know that even with camera mode, it's still very restrictive, and a lot of us always wanted to get a better look at the environment here since this is one of the key locations that looks so similar to the original game. But that's actually not why we're looking around this room right now. Instead, there is something of note that is very Boundary Break-esque. One of the very small flowers on top of this bookcase here appears to be in a cylinder flower pot, but in truth, it's just a shrunken down version of one of the flowers you saw earlier, and it's evidenced by the fact that when you take the camera inside the cylinder, you can see the more ornate one hidden behind it, which is some pretty clever use of asset flipping. And then the strange meat vendor in Sector 6. You would think that what I'm about to show you has something to do with that disgusting looking sandwich, but in truth, what we're going to be looking at today is what's inside the bowl. At all times, he kind of tilts the bowl away from the player, and again, even with the camera, it never gets you an angle in which you could see what he's scooping around in there, and it looks to be some pink ground meat that he's mixing around with his own hand. And here's a little elevator sequence here. This is kind of interesting. In the Coliseum, when Cloud's going down the elevator, it does very much look like you're going somewhere, but if you pan the camera out, you can see that it's just a texture that keeps getting looped over and over again to give the simulation that the elevator's going somewhere. But in truth, your destination has been sitting in front of you that whole time. The game just makes you wait. And then for some of the more unusual environments, I just wanted to pan the camera all the way out so that you can see where it lies inside the game world. This weird sequence where Cloud is talking to himself takes place in relation to nowhere, but it does have its own sky dome that is pure white. And then that Coliseum that we were talking about earlier also loads separately from Sector 6. What's great is that the Sky Dome does stick around, which is pretty awesome to see, which just proves that you're not in a completely different zone. And then that menu where you can see all the bestiary, taking the camera out can show you that it has sort of like a bullet-like shape, which makes it kind of surprising that this area is so freaking massive since the camera is incredibly limited here. And then you got one of these scenes towards the end of the game, and I thought it'd be great to show you a nice, beautifully animated cutscene, and then stop it just as Cloud is looking at Midgar. Because for as beautiful the visuals are for this scene, it's fascinating to break the illusion here and show you that Midgar is not fully modeled by any means. It is also, yet again, a sky dome and features absolutely no 3D depth to it. Also, did any of you guys ever take the stairs when you were in the Shinra building? I feel terrible for you guys, especially in the remake. But what's cool about the remake, at least, is that if we take the camera out, I can show you all the floors in one shot. And yeah, if you haven't gotten to this part of the game yet, maybe you'll think twice before taking the stairs. Trust me, it's just not worth it. And in this scene, I'm going to show you something cool here. We got Cloud going down this hallway, and he suddenly has a vision of Genova. Well, there's this whole map that you just navigated to get to this point, and the Genova scene seems to be completely disjointed from wherever you are. So where is it in relation to the actual map? Well, if we pause the scene here where we're looking at Genova, and then pan the camera out, you can see it's very, very, very far away from where your character was originally. Also, let's take a quick look at the Genova model here. Taking the camera inside of the helmet, I guess, will show you that there is no modeled head, but there are a series of wires, which is really fascinating. This is something that you normally can't see. And also, I think that the texture for the glass that is supposed to be over her face isn't mapped properly. Something's not right here. If you pan the camera over, you can definitely see that it's distorted in certain areas. Anyways, let's do a zoom out of the wall market. And what's great about doing the zoom out here is that once we get outside of the zone, it loses the nighttime effect, giving us an even better look at the entire environment. Alright, so for this next category, we're going to be looking at cutscenes out of bounds and try to find some little oddities here and there, but surprisingly, all the cutscenes in Final Fantasy VII Remake seem to have absolutely no cut corners when it comes to the animation. And by that I mean, it's incredibly common in animation where if there's a shot of a character from the shoulders up, some wacky stuff will be happening underneath. But with Final Fantasy VII Remake, as you've been seeing here this whole time, even characters that are out of frame seem to be animated normally. Incredibly odd exception where it's almost as if all the scenes were animated in one way, and then surprisingly the camera angles were later added in, with only some necessary exceptions, like culling out a character model so it doesn't get in the way of the camera. That being said, there's a lot of instances where characters kind of walk off screen, and I've gotten curious as to where they go. Like in the case of Reno here, after you escape him in the church, him and his goons kind of walk out of the church and head back out into the city. And there's a couple of funny things that happen here, one of which being that at a certain point, Reno goes from a limp to walking normally, and then him and all the Shinra soldiers kind of crowd up into one spot. Also, earlier in the same chapter, just after you beat Reno and you're on the other side of the doors trying to escape, I was really surprised to see the fact that Reno is in fact still on the other side of those doors, but not flawlessly. Although he's bent over because he's just been defeated in battle, half his body's underneath the floorboards. And then there's a scene where Aerith leaves the party for a glam up with Madam M, and once again, really surprised by this, and although the player is absolutely not allowed to see behind the curtain and gets scolded for trying, if we take the camera over there, we can see both Aerith and Madam M are in fact there, with Aerith looking in front of the mirror. And then there's a cutscene where we're first introduced to Reeves, and you can sort of see where his office is in conjunction with the rest of the floor. After having that needed visual aid, I went to a later scene in the game where all the Shinra employees are on deck. And despite the fact that it's really difficult to see, I was very happy to notice that Reeves is in fact still sitting at his desk and typing on an invisible computer keyboard. Very nice. And then there's this scene where you see the Shinra president and you just barely miss him as he goes into a conference room. Now, this is one of those rare instances where if we take the camera inside and see what's going on, one of the characters goes into an A pose. Now let's talk about the birds. Last episode we talked about rats, and now we can talk about flying rats. Yeah, there's pigeons in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and once again, they're done up quite well with plumage that has a little bit of greens and purples mixed into their neck. And speaking of low poly creatures, if we take the camera really far away and then freeze the entire game, we are allowed to see a low poly cloud. Now, I think a lot of you are going to be impressed by the fact that low poly cloud looks pretty great, honestly. But one of the things that developers do to save a lot on resources is lower the level of detail of the characters' incredibly detailed eyes. So what you're left with here is a honestly really interesting expression. It ain't half as bad as Aerith's though. Good lord, I don't even know what's going on here. But let's distract ourselves from that by mentioning the fact that the basket that she hands off to Cloud in a cutscene is stored right underneath the model outside of the boundaries. And let's wrap this up by taking the camera inside a fat chocobo. While that's going on, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. But more importantly, if this is the first Final Fantasy video from my channel that you've seen and you want to see even more out of bounds stuff from the same game, I'll leave a link in the video description for the part 1, and also it'll show up at the end of the video here. It's probably on the screen right now. Fans of Boundary Break will be happy to know that there will probably be a premiere video of the new host sometime this month, so keep an eye out for that. Whoever I pick, please, be kind, give positive feedback like you guys did to me many years ago, and expect exciting things. All right, well, take it easy, guys.